ReelAbilities Los Angeles now welcomes you to a live discussion with the filmmaker behind Deafula, Peter Wolf. Peter is joined by Mel Carter, retired deaf studies professor at California State University Northridge, to discuss the importance of the film, representation of deaf culture and film, and the importance of ASL in media. Mel, the virtual floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I am very happy to be here with all of you. We'll be here for a discussion. And then, we have the biggest, smartest, most talented director of this film, Deafula, Peter Wolf. We've known each other for many years. He's made many different movies. And I know you just watched Deafula. So we're going to open for questions, and we can think about and respond. Thank you also to the Department of Disabilities Access for supporting this panel. So I think we can move forward. Who would like to start us off?
Oh, is this on to me now? Is it my turn? Because this whole Zoom thing is still pretty new to me. But has everyone had a chance to see Deafula? Did you notice the name of the director of this? It was Peter Wexberg. But, it was hard for me to get through in Hollywood, so I decided to go by Peter Wolf instead, and I've been doing that ever since. Any questions from anyone in the audience at this point? I am ready and excited for any questions. It seems we have one. I think we need a spotlight, perhaps.
We have interpreters here for the hearing folks in the audience who would like to ask their questions. The interpreters will sign it, and then we'll understand and be able to respond. Especially questions about film production and anything behind the scenes.
Yeah, so there's a question from the audience. So they want to know a little bit more about making the film and why was it important?
No, I would say, of course, I wanted sign language to have exposure all around the country. I think sign language is very beautiful, and not just beautiful, but it's very artistic as well. It's part of the artistic process, being such a visual language. I just thought it was gorgeous. And I thought, you see, hearing people speaking their language, right? But then when you have this opportunity for hands involved in sign language, as they say, sign language is a three-dimensional language. And so that was why I decided I wanted to make this film. And basically it all related to sign language for me. I thought it was a perfect fit for a visual medium, and that's why I felt it was important to do that.
Mark saying, oh, this is my first time, and I'm curious. It's good to see you. One moment.
Yeah, they made you big, Mark Wood.
I was a young kid, I think, when the movie came out, when I watched that movie. Deaf Blind. I remember we started the production. I'm wondering if the movie was rated R, or did you get a rating on that over years? You know, or what about, or if, sorry, if there's something on YouTube and it was stolen, I'm not sure if people saw the movie, but you've been an inspiration for me as a director with films. And so I just want to let you know that you've provided a lot of inspiration over my life.
Yes, Mark and I have been such good friends, and we really had a lot of interests that we shared with each other. And when one of us would be down, the other would help him out with the money just to make things grow, to help things prosper. So if I needed to borrow some money to put into a movie that eventually made it into succeeding, you had to borrow against your house. It was really difficult. So Mark borrowed money from me, and I was really glad I was able to help him out.
I'm satisfied. I just wanted to say my part. And Mel's saying we're open. Anyone else want to join the discussion?
Yeah, there's another question by an audience member. The question is, were there any scenes you didn't get to shoot or had to edit out that you wish you could have been kept in or Criterion included in a later release?
Oh, so you're talking about specifically Deafula, from specifically that movie.
Yes.
Oh yeah, when I was working on Deafula, there were a lot of things we'd love to do, but our resources were really limited. We were in Portland making that film, and we didn't have any kind of lab. So we'd have to send the film off to Los Angeles. It was a nightmare to try and manage all of that. It was so frustrating. I wish I could have done many things on that film. So it was a very frustrating experience. And I know the guy who's doing the camera work, hearing guy, fantastic guy, but was really big on advertisements. But then to come on to feature films and do other things, it's a whole different filmic language. Nowadays, of course, everything is different. I am very much grateful to people who've been able to invest in the business, in my movie, so I was able to make it happen. Or specifically the film festival, where they've invested in getting the film updated. It's a much better quality on digital than it was when it was on the film. What did get converted into VHS, but now to have digital, I'm very excited about this. And my wife is an excellent sound designer, so she's going to be able to put in all the bells and whistles and make it so much better. So I'm even considering colorizing it if possible, because the technology that exists nowadays, I mean, it's just phenomenal. Maybe I could change my face. To be honest, I don't like my face in the film. A lot of people even kind of make fun of how it came out, but this was my first picture. I was a baby director. I mean, I didn't really always have it exactly what I wanted. And people would tell me, okay, the sound was awful or whatever. And I'm like, well, but I'm a deaf designer, so I don't know that I necessarily know how to make all the sound. Oh, excuse the interpreter. People said, you're deaf, you can't be a filmmaker. And I'm like, but I made one. So I believed it could work from English into an ASL framework. And you saw people, they would respond, they would get scared. You had that sort of action you could see. But I definitely have a very long wish list now that I have a fresh opportunity to work with this film in digital. Maybe next year there'll be another showing, and we'll call it Deafula Revamped. It's a whole new version from what you've seen. I mean, the 75 film from 75 is getting pretty old now.
I look forward to that. I'm looking forward to the new version of Deafula revamped. But also you should add the new word
Revampired.
Oh, revampired. You could.
I don't know. I'll have to talk that over with my wife.
What
do you think? She says no.
Oh, you don't think it's funny? No, I'm just making a joke. I'm so sorry. But now that we're talking about it, how do you plan for the movie before? What did you, when you were placing people, when you were finding the cast, I'm sure that was hard to find the right people, and writing the script, you had to have a script, all these things.
Okay. So originally we had those old reel-to-reel films that we would show movies. When I was in school, the residential school I was in, I'm trying to remember, the movie is called like Commando or something like that. The Last Commando. And I remember when I was 9 years old, I was watching this and I was crying when the lights came on and everyone around me was talking. I had to go up to the screen and I'm like, it's this thin little piece of fabric. And I did not understand how that screen, that little piece of fabric, made me cry. And the first thing that occurred to me was magic. This is magic. And I want to be involved with the magic. And I felt like that the rest of my life. I did a lot of stuff on the stage, but stage, that really wasn't my bag. But I learned from that experience. Then I started making films. And I would look over, certain minorities finally breaking through. There was a film called Blackula that came out and became a big hit and made a lot of money. And I said, hey, you know what? Let's try a Deafula. They had their Blackula. Why not try Deafula? And so that was kind of the germ. And then in Portland, I was using local actors from Portland. There was no way I could afford to pay for people to fly in any of the top-notch actors. That would have been very hard. So I used the local community and I taught these people how to act. But there was also a little cinematic seasoning I would throw in a little bit to make it look very Hollywood. So that took a lot of work for me to get that up and running. And there was one person in particular I had a hard time really getting through to. It was a hearing person. And it was really hard to kind of give off the language the way a deaf person would. They were kind of struggling with the hand language. So they were struggling a little bit on that, but that's who I pulled in. And during that whole production, there were frustrations. Oh boy, several times over, I got frustrated, but it was the first baby I birthed. And people seemed to love it because for us, it was our first opportunity to see a feature film in sign language. And so people really appreciated that opportunity. And it eventually it went around the world. I mean, people loved it. They would show it at parties. I really enjoy that fact. We even had a world premiere party.
Okay, so audience, ask away.
Yes, this question is for Mel. As a professor of deaf studies, what do Peter's film mean to your students or the field itself?
Well, that's an interesting question. You're asking from a professor's perspective. there were there have been several movies by Peter. One of them is called Think Me Nothing, and another one is I Love You But. And I think there's something with the a third one, and I try to explain to students about the story, and that we can see what happens in deaf life through these stories, because we exist in a hearing world. And I'll let you know that want them to know what a deaf life looks like, and really encourage people to study the film on TV and film for people who are going into that major, and that they can work with the deaf community. And I agree that it's good. It's a good exposure, really. I don't think I can name another movie director that is another filmmaker such as Peter that would have been a good example for students. Can I, what's the name? Let me ask Peter, what's the name of that movie? I can't quite remember it, but with Deafula, the first one. And really creative spirit. And we're all thankful to have access to that piece of art. Is that David? David? Did that answer your question?
And honestly, I'm not sure who asked the question. I'm not sure where that question came from.
It was an audience question that was in the chat. There is another question for Peter, asking about the more recent movies he's made and the technology he's utilized so deaf audiences can feel, quote unquote, the film.
Okay, well, remember we had Mark Wood who popped up a few moments ago, an old friend of mine. We were talking about making movies, right? And it's a lot of hard work to make movies, but anyway. The idea came out, if we have digital film, and not like this, not now. I mean, we used to use film, and film is insanely more complicated. And that was part of the reason I was frustrated so much, because we would do these takes and then we would have the playback. When we're talking about in the old days, and I didn't know how this worked. You normally would have a lab that would work on this overnight. So we didn't have any opportunity for playback. We couldn't really do that kind of reshooting. So that became really frustrating without having any of that playback. So, nowadays you can oftentimes just kind of sit and watch what it looks like on the playback, and you can be just, yeah, cut, print, we're looking good. It's that simple. And it's so much easier to follow continuity once you have that playback. I mean, oh my gosh, the money we used to have to spend, I mean, it was just insane. But you have film and you're stuck with film. And if you wasted it, you wasted it. So digital this nowadays is just, it's nothing like it used to be. So I think digital really makes it so much easier. When I look back, and I would have 400 people under me, 400 people that I had to direct and get organized and all of that. We had to make sure we have the lighting in the right place. And we had to do every little teeny tiny detail that was all ultimately on my shoulders. Nowadays, you wouldn't have 400 people under you. I mean, with my wife and I, we could probably have a crew of 5 and do everything ourselves, because we're in the digital era. And so you have to worry about lighting and that's more or less it. I mean, I can't believe when I look back and I had the 400 people under me, and that was, a huge expense as well. So that's another example where costs are just not what they used to be. So yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, you could do a lot more films, but now I'm up there. I'm getting up to 76 at this point. I am still healthy. Thank you, Lord. I am still around, but I wish that it had been digital back when I was in my salad days, because then I could have made a lot of movies, just like Mark Wood has the opportunity to do that. Mark Wood has made 10, and I've done, 4 or 5? But Hollywood films that are out there where you had maybe Tony Curtis, I mean, all those really big name actors, Stallone, all of those people in all of those films. Oh, I mean, I was able to be a DP on those, but it's a different world. Once you're in a deaf production house and you could work with people maybe who don't have that kind of experience, I call it film grammar, right? The idea where you can just kind of point, and this is where you're going, and this is what you need to do. So, or you just need to do the spotlight in this area. So everyone just kind of understands how it works. So you can work with the crew. I mean, I love that kind of opportunity to be able to work with people like that. Oh, so sorry. I thought somebody was talking about Filmquake.
Yeah. Please go ahead. Yes.
Okay, I missed that. I'm so sorry. I missed that question. Oh, well, I'm still happy to talk about what I just told you anyway. I'm happy to share that story. But as far as the music quake is concerned, when I was younger, my parents took me to Buffalo, New York. And they had this waterfall there. And I remember just being so entranced by it, how massive it was, just absolutely huge. And I remember they were asking me, do you like it? I'm like, I love this. And there was this little tiny raft on the water. And I remember I got on there and I laid down, and all the water would kind of come in, and I could feel the vibrations underneath the raft from the falls. So even, it was kind of, you could feel it coming from one side, and then you felt it coming from the other side. I fell in love with that. And so I didn't even want to go home. I was there for an hour. I was having the time of my life. I loved those vibrations. And it was kind of sort of the noise. It was kind of sort of the nature. It was absolutely beautiful. And I never forgot that. So then a new movie came out called Earthquake with Charlton Heston in it. And I remember watching that in the theater at, Grauman's Chinese Theater. And they had installed this new surround sound around it where you would sit in the seats, right? And I'm like, but this isn't this exciting for me. I mean, it was almost like somebody was kicking on my butt or something. I'm like, what? They called them butt kickers. I was not so sure about those. But about 13, 14 years later, somebody came to my house to talk about the Constitution, the film that I made. Excuse me, I was 14 years old, and somebody was coming in my house to talk about the Constitution. And they were saying, okay, excuse the interpreter. I wanted to go, the priest wanted to take me to see the 10 Commandment movies, right? That was a big thing. Mel and I were talking about the 10 Commandments earlier. And I was remembering that waterfall experience I'd had before, but here in the audience, I'm watching this big movie and there's no vibration. There's no energy going on. And I remember my father asking me afterwards, hey, did you like it? I'm like, well, it was okay. I mean, it was a spectacle, but it's not really what I was looking for. And then when they finally made IMAX, that finally came out, and they would have those special events where those seats would actually move. And I'm like, okay, yes. Like I remember we saw Spider-Man. And there would be special times during the movie, just at random points during the movie, there would be impacts, vibration impacts that might happen when certain things were happening, if buildings were crumbling or whatever. Much like in the movie Godzilla. And so when I did my film, I Love You But, we added in some music quake. And I remember my wife was the sound designer, and she said, there's just no way that would never work. I mean, it's not possible. It's not something that's going to work. I'm like, let's do it anyway. And so and I'm the one who did this. I would make all the decisions. And I'm like, okay, so the snake is deaf. So we're going to make sure that the vibrations are really out there. And so for hearing people, they wouldn't even really, the vibrations weren't for them. They would go by the sound effects. When something would happen, that would respond. But for me, the sound doesn't work, the vibration works. So it's a completely different experience. So I put that in. So in response to the vibrations first, I put all of those in there. And I think we had over 600 events during that film. And people were so worried that we would make people sick. And I kept saying, no. You're thinking along those disaster films where it's really big. It's a very hard hitting feeling. For me, no. Like, if you have a scene in the car, right? If you see this in Hollywood a million times and somebody shuts the door and you hear the sound, but for deaf people, there's a feeling too. When that door shuts, you feel a little bump when that happens. So not everything was big. Sometimes it'd be very small motions that would happen. So everyone said I was crazy to try and put 600 in there. But I said, you know what? If I make a lousy movie, the deaf people are still going to go see it.
Oh, that's good.
As long as there's that music quake.
That made me think of a movie with different sounds. I remember feeling it in my chair, but there was no butt kicking. It was more continuous. It was more of an ongoing vibration feeling, but it made me feel, I liked it. But I do have another question. Mark Woods made a digital movie. It's never been on stage, and it was a good movie. It was a digital film that he made into a DVD, and copies were made and sold. And I'm wondering if you could comment about how to not have copies of your work pirated or stolen in that way.
Okay, so Deafula came out, right? We filmed that one, of course, right? And there was no digital. There was nothing like that in our time at all. Everything was on film, right? The reel-to-reel films. And we would have theatrical showings where it would be actually projected onto a screen. And then one person asked me if they could have a copy. And we're not talking digital, we're talking video, right? Like VHS machines, those sorts of things. So nothing digital. But they asked if they could have a copy. And I thought, sure, I'll give it a try. We'll try to make a copy, see what happens. And then someone pirated it, sold it, and has made more money off of this film than I have.
Yeah, you have to protect yourself. Sure.
Yeah, so I have to be very protective of my work. So I'm not interested in having things available digitally because of the pirating that I have gone through in my life. Like that movie I mentioned earlier, I Think Me Nothing. I mean, nothing has gone out. I have just kind of held on to it ever since it came out. My hope is someday to sell it to a distributor so a person can purchase it that way. But I can't just let everything go loosey-goosey out there. Another example is Coda, the film Coda. was sold for $25 million. I mean, that blows my mind. And A Quiet Place, another film, that earned a lot of money. And so I asked deaf people, I'm like, what is this compared with any of the movies you make? And I mean, they'll say, well, of course, there's I Love You, But. And, you know, some people think that that's better than A Quiet Place. I get a lot of feedback like that, but I'm not earning that kind of money. And that's a marketing problem. It is not easy for those really good deaf filmmakers out there. It's a tough road to hoe. It's really hard to make it out there. And that's part of the frustration. But I don't want to talk too much about all of the frustrations I've gone through. I've gone through them. But the problem is, or I shouldn't say problem, but the thing is, I love making films. I'm a sick puppy. What can I tell you?
And yes, then they make life more fun and more meaningful and can expand the excitement out in the community. And I see there might be another question here.
Yes, this question is for Professor Carter, but feel free to also chime in, Peter. So the question goes, so many social media apps let people make short movies like 7-second clips. Some informational, but usually really funny, and lots are silent or captioned. It's kind of brought those things into the mainstream, but no one seems to equate it with access. Just more that it's convenient to watch a funny clip and not have to turn on the sound. Do you feel that incidental, quote unquote, incidental access is useful or helpful in general, especially from something so many young people are plugged into?
I am of mixed feelings, half and half. I would say first, it is wonderful to get information out. Social media, yes, I'm supportive of that. But when we're talking about the quality and how often things are left, some things are left to be desired. Some things could be done better. You know, they're quick, they're snap take, and I realize that people can really do anything with social media. So it could be a model for deaf people to show the right or wrong way. If there's, well, let's see, I didn't mean help. I meant can clarify, you know, like a deaf person can say, oh, that is correct, or that is not, or that is applicable to deaf people, or that is not. So I would say I have mixed feelings. I do have a hard time saying it's completely good or completely bad. I think because both things can happen on either side of the phone or camera. So it's interesting, Peter. Which do you think? Do you think social media, you know, many times it's impacted you?
Well, thinking about today, the stuff we see out there today, things have really changed. Technology has really gotten better and better and better, even in short months. So you know, remember there was this whole idea of being able to wear those glasses where you had the things right in front of you. Oh, excuse the interpreter. You could have your face replaced. So these apps, you know, things are just amazing what you can do with the technology nowadays. And I look at the kids. There's this one deaf person, Gary, who had shown me this in his face. And there was like, oh, in Braveheart, it showed him being in Braveheart because they were able to replace the face onto the Mel character. I mean, it's mind-blowing what you can do. And social media has just really gotten huge with the new technology that's out there. I mean, things are changing exponentially. But I'm kind of old school. Well, I don't know if I should say old school, but telling stories and drama, the storylines and all of that, that's kind of more me. But now it's becoming more and more about the big effects and all of that. That's not really my thing if other people want to go that way. Now, I used to do full scripts in the earlier days. I would give actors full scripts. But now, or excuse the interpreter, I never used to give scripts to people. I would give outlines, some of the key dialogue, and I'd say, I want you to put these ideas out there, but I want them to feel free with how they render the dialogue in American Sign Language. I want them to feel really comfortable with that. I've seen several deaf people, several actors. If you give them the full script, then that affects the quality of their sign language that comes out, because they're trying to go in the English word order, which is not what American Sign Language looks like. But because they have that English model locked in their brain, they're not very fluent with their use of ASL. So I prefer doing outlines. I found those have been really successful in my movies. So I like filming off of outlines rather than scripts, because too many people get too frozen in the English language.
So with social media, I want to back up a little and relate it with social justice and the excitement that about deaf being able to express themselves, and it's economic, but they're not, but economically it's not justice. It's almost like taking advantage. It's not borrowing, it's more taking advantage of the language, because people can put stuff out there without crediting people. So it seems like there's some social justice happening, but economically it's not that way. And minorities often complain that they don't make enough money because we try to kind of keep them small and focused, and it's hard to really please everybody. So, but if you have a large audience, of course, you will have more available, more criticism and more positive feedback as well. I guess, well, that'll be the answer for now.
Yeah, I know for me, you know, that whole idea of social justice and economic justice, you know, that's not really where my interest is. I mean, I know I'm interested in what's going on and I like learning, but that's not my internal motivation. That's not what really fires me, because for me, I'm an artistic person and you don't really see arts in there so much. I'm more on the human stories, the artistic ways of expressing yourself. That's where my passion lies. And that's where I really express myself the most. It's just in different ways. And not that I'm against anything at all. I'm very much interested in what's going on out there, but political debates and all of that stuff, it's just not who I am. Art makes me feel like I'm going to live that much longer. I've met so many actors and artists, you know, in their 80s and 90s and, you know, coming onto a century. And it's because arts make you live longer. And that's what I want. I want to live longer too.
Right. Let me see. Maybe you could tell our audience, filming, oh, in 8mm or 35mm or 72mm, all the intricacies of that behind the scenes.
I've used them all. In Hollywood, we had 35mm. I bought my camera and it cost a pretty penny, I assure you. And then we had used on the movie The Shining. That was the same camera they used on The Shining. So I had some of that equipment. We had cranes. So we would use, I'm trying to remember what, oh, it was on King Kong. That crane was used on the movie King Kong. That new one that came out from Peter Jackson. They used my equipment on that. So my Steadicam, yeah, all of that equipment I used to have, but 80 millimeters, that was back when I was a real little kid. And they'd be really huge. I remember what those used to look like. And then we went to the shorter millimeters, and you think me nothing, that was 16 millimeters. And now in digital, everything's scanned, you know, it's, you know, the teeny, you can really make a really good resolution out of a 16 millimeter film that gets scanned. I mean, there's really great stuff you can do, but I like using 35 millimeter these days with digital. You know, they're going into 3K, 4K. Now they're talking about 12K. I mean, that just blows my mind. When I had my camera, my very, very old VK camera, that thing cost $35,000. And now you can get things for $12,000. I mean, the 12Ks, those cost hundreds of dollars. I mean, times have changed. They've really changed.
Are there any new questions?
So any other questions from anyone?
Yes. So you mentioned that Blackula as an inspiration for Deafula. Do you wonder why Blackula served as a vehicle for greater acceptance of films by and about Black community over the years, but the same hasn't occurred for the deaf community?
Yeah, the Deafula film, 27,000 deaf people, 27,000 deaf people came to that. But they kind of stopped. I mean, the community got smaller. So we had like 27,000. Oh, I'm so sorry. My wife's asking me a question. Give me a second. So sorry about this. So I misunderstood the question. That's why my wife is coming into me. She's leading me to the right answer. Okay, so, okay, I got it. So 27,000, I was really excited. But when you talk about the film like Blackula, I mean, what's key is to get lots of donations, and they were getting a lot of donations. With Blackula, there was a place in Hollywood where you could kind of go to get those. They had distribution centers in Hollywood that they could use. And that was part of what made it successful. Now, I'm a deaf person, right? And it used to be that you would have distribution centers of some kind where you could actually show things like Deafula, like MGM Universal. And that, you know, and that's where you would show them. And everyone complained about the sound. Now with Blackula, you had Black people in there. With Deafula, you had people who use sign language. To me, what was the difference? But I wasn't really prepared for people complaining about the sound. So there was a system in place for Black movies, but there was nothing yet for deaf movies out at that time. So it was hard to really grow that audience. But I noticed over time, you would start seeing it pop up from time to time when there'd be like big movies like A Quiet Place or things like that. Those are starting to come out now. But with that, and perhaps if we have Deafula revamped or something, that'll be something that pulls people's interest in 2021, 2022, because there's been a little bit of a history now.
Very good. Thank you for that answer. I want to comment about why there's success in other films is that deaf people, the deaf movie includes sound. So when it has like sound effects, and so when you, as a hearing person, go to see a movie, we want to emphasize the visual as opposed to the auditory, and people who hear can see as well. And so when you go to see a film, it's a hard sell if you're going to compare those two. Blackula seemed to have a language that fit with the world. And the silence of a movie, silent films in America were prior to this time. And so people were not used to the turn taking anymore when Deafula came out. So that made it seem like deaf people were behind, or that the movie was a little bit more old-fashioned. And I'm wondering if there were some misconceptions. I don't know, maybe that has something to do with the difference. Are there more questions? Oh,
well, if I can respond to that, I mean, I could become a millionaire if I knew the answer to that, right? How to really make those movies for deaf people that kind of appeal to hearing people too. But for me, I don't want the movies that are like, oh my gosh, this poor deaf person is such a victim. Let's just sit and weep over how miserable their life is because it's so hard to be a deaf person. I know hearing people would flock to that. I know they would. You know, you'd have huge ticket sales on something like that. It'd be easy to make money that way. But that's not the kind of thing I want to make, like with I Love You, But. You know, I made deaf people look normal. And people would be confused by that. What, deaf people are normal? I thought that they were just poor, defenseless little creatures out in the world who were waiting for a handout. They're used to giving pity to characters that are like deaf people. So you pull in the big bucks when you make your deaf characters pitiable characters. But that's just not who I am. That's not my personality.
that is a good point. It's charitable. That kind of film would cause people to feel sorry and pitiful, and it would exhibit that deaf people can't do all these things. And yeah, we have to, that is what I was thinking of as well.
If I can add also, there's of course the cochlear implant issue, right? Those big debates that are going on out there about cochlear implants and whether a person lacks or not. I mean, I'm fine with who I am. Or this big debate on whether you should use oral languages or manual languages, and that whole argument that goes out. But for deaf people who use spoken language and don't use sign language, I used to work at Kron Television, where I would sign on television, or people who preferred deaf people use spoken language wanted me reviewed. They got a petition going to pull me off of that. And everyone was fighting me. But eventually we got 2,500 people signing a petition to keep me there and keep sign language on Kron Television. They wanted me there. They wanted to see the language. So they eventually decided to keep me. And those people who preferred spoken language, oralists as they're called, started dying off over time. So things did get better. It took a while. But they started using sign language, and it's not been easy. It's not been an easy thing to do, but you do what you can. You know, where's my 200,000? But I need a budget to make a film.
I do see a hand up. Let me see. Is there another question?
Yes. Yes, there's another question. So what advice do you have for deaf filmmakers who want to break into Hollywood? Are things better than in 1975? And what can we do together to get more authentic representation of deaf culture in mainstream films?
Was that a question to me? Okay.
Yes. Or either one of you guys. I mean, it's open to either Peter or Mel.
Okay. To become a filmmaker in Hollywood is really difficult. It's not like, for example, if you think of Marlee Matlin. And it was easy because she was able to get so-called deaf roles, right? But for me, I'm competing against hearing people who are in the same professional category I am. So it's not as easy. So for example, you know, films that are put out in Hollywood nowadays. When I worked on the crew for Gypsy or new productions, I'll go and work on a production as a gypsy for a while. But then there are a lot of other people who have, say, director of photography. There's a lot of people who want to be director of photography. So oftentimes I'm at the end of the line. I'm the very last option they get. And so they've hired someone else instead of me. So we'd be, excuse the interpreter, oftentimes we'd be the last people in line. They would see me there and they would leave because I would get the job. People loved working with me. So I'm in Hollywood. And I studied how to make movies. I learned how to do beautiful art. And I fought really hard to get out there. And I had to do better than my hearing peers. It was very difficult for me to get there. I grew up in New York, and my father was really tough. He actually escaped from Auschwitz. So he had a really tough life, and he taught me during my life where we lived in Harlem. So, and I'm glad I had that experience of living there because it wasn't an easy life. And so I learned how to fight. So when I came out to make movies, I didn't want to be really quiet and wimpy and just kind of sitting back in the corner and being mousy. You have to go in there. I mean, honestly, my wife never likes me when I'm on the set because I'm very angry and very declarative and very decisive. And my wife, she'll, you know, she's like, I don't even know you. When you're on the set, you're not the normal human that I usually deal with. but I have to make sure we're not going over budget. I have to make sure that all the ducks are in a row. I cannot be blowing any money, because if I get money blown, I will lose my job. So I work hard to keep things under budget so that the producer is able to save some money on other things. I mean, that's just the way it is in Hollywood, but you have to be a taskmaster.
We have 5 minutes left. So let's wrap up with the last few questions.
Okay, I do see a hand up. I'm ready for another question.
Yes, last question. So in today's movies, it's not just sound effects, but also music that adds suspense. Hitchcock also used visual effects to create suspense. Any thoughts on how to create something similar for the deaf community that would cross over to the mainstream audience?
Should that be you, Mel, or do you want to answer that?
Sound for today. No, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, because there's different kinds, and there's different kinds of answers, right? So me, I'm deaf. So when I see movies, I know there are people that are fourth or fifth gen deaf in their family, fourth or fifth generation, who have no idea what sound is. I mean, that's just not even relevant to their lives. They are from deaf people for generations back. And so I don't have people saying, oh, you're missing out on music. I mean, that's just never been relevant to my life. So with movies like I Love You, But, there's that one character saying, oh, but what about music? And what about this? It's not about the music. It's about the mood. And there's this famous singer who makes everyone cry, this famous violinist that makes everyone cry. Yeah, my wife's, oh, sorry. There was just a little confusion between us. But anyway, yeah, there's this really famous musician who's, studied how music affects people. And they'll get people in a room and they'll say, okay, just play for 1 minute with no words, just music, right? And this person will play the violin and will make people cry. They're like, okay, they can do that in less than a minute based on the music. And that's something I've always remembered. And so with Music Quake, I'm thinking maybe we could do something along these lines. So as I mentioned earlier, those 600 incidents in the movie I Love You, But, like in Chicago, for example, there was like a president of a club for the deaf that was fourth, fifth, sixth generation deaf. And after that person sat in their seat, people were coming up saying, what's wrong? And the person was saying, I hadn't realized. I mean, you see all the visuals, but all of those little things that just really vibrations that come through the chair. I mean, that the same way hearing people listen to music, you're building all of those feelings in a tactile sense, and you're building to a crescendo, or maybe there's a jump scare. Think of the movie Jaws, right? The music before you actually saw the shark, da-da-da-da, before it finally happened. That didn't exist when the movie Jaws came out, to have things like Music Quake, but that feeling where you can bring in a little bit of that movement and you can get a little of that emotion in there. With Jaws, people use the cello. And you would recognize that instantly as a shark. They hear the cello, they know the shark is there somewhere. Just that dun dun, they knew. You didn't need to see the shark. The shark was almost never there. But you heard that cello and you knew. You knew the shark was coming. And that's what terrified people. And when people watch movies on the big screen, You have the screen, but then you also have surround sound. And so I'm trying to play things a little bit so deaf people have more experiences. My example earlier of closing the door and you feel a little bit of a bump in your chair. Nothing big, but just, it moves the air. There's actually air pressure that you feel when that door closes, and whether it's closed softly or slams. So you know that someone even though they're not in frame, you feel that pressure in the air, you know somebody closed the door. That's what the deaf experience is like. Rather than following sound, that's what it's like in the deaf community.
We are stopping. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We would like to give a big ReelAbilities Los Angeles thank you to Peter and Mel for this fascinating and important discussion on Deafula. We would like everyone to please join us tomorrow morning as ReelAbilities Los Angeles continues with the winners and additional short films from the Easter Seals Disability Challenge. Start watching the films by 11 a.m. so you can join us for the Filmmaker discussion at 11:40 a.m. led by Easter Seals Disability Challenge founder, Nick Novicki. Check this out.
Hello, ReelAbilities family. I'm Nick Novicki, the founder and director of the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge. The Film Challenge is an annual competition that puts disability in the entertainment spotlight, making a film that has somebody with a disability in front of or behind the camera. This year we had a record-breaking amount of films during a global pandemic, which is really amazing. Now you're about to see the winners and some of the select films from this year's Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge. The genre is mockumentary films, so we got a lot of funny films. I know you're looking at the Chinese theater and you're like, wow, we're going to the Chinese theater? No, it's a virtual festival this year for the safety of everyone involved. But I can't thank everyone at ReelAbilities Film Festival LA for all their support and everything they do to make the world more inclusive. I want to give a very special thank you shout out to Stephen David Simon, Danny Woodburn, and everyone on the Department of Disability at the City of Los Angeles. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you in person next year. And I'm going into the Chinese theater to make sure that our film's screened there next year.